Hello. Today is Tuesday, October 26th, and uh, I'm here to do another live. And this week I was going to talk, or am going to talk about white collar crimes. We get a lot of questions, more email than phone calls on the white collar stuff, but uh, people want to know what is white collar crime. And, the easiest way to put it is it generally involves some type of fraud. Uh, it generally has a financial motive. There's a lot of ways to commit what people call white collar crimes, but white collar crimes isn't a section of law. So the term white collar crime was first defined by the sociologist Edwin Sutherland, and that was back in 1939. And he defined it as a crime committed by a person of respectability and high social status in the course of their occupation. But if you look in, like I still use books a lot, the Texas codes or the federal codes, both big books, there's not a section, for white collar crimes. It's just what people perceive certain offenses to be. And generally, like I said, they're financial in nature. We see a lot of different types of what you would classify as a white collar crime. Uh, a simple example that we've seen locally a couple of times in the past couple of years is someone who works for their employer and over time has taken money from their employer without their employer's knowledge. And so I've seen that as simple or as complex as having someone create a company that supposedly provides a service to the company and then submitting those invoices and having them paid to the company while it's really the individual who owns that company and is pocketing that money. Uh, I've seen it as simple as someone has the checkbook in the office, like they pay the bills for the company, do all the invoicing and paying out of bills and whatnot, and they just start paying their own bills uh, with company money. Uh, and shockingly to me, in that case, it went undetected for a number of years, and by the time the employer found out, it was a very large sum of money. But the reason I said shocking to me is because you would think that a company doing business on the volume that they were would have had an accountant or someone flagging what certain expenses were. I have always used an accountant, and my accountants certainly have always asked me what they thought was a strange charge. And for me, it's usually me paying for something and not classifying it right. I've never had it where anyone that worked for me was, abusing any of my financial systems. But uh, that should give you sort of a start or an overview of what we're talking about when uh, we see people charged with white collar crimes. Locally, we kind of see an uptick sometimes after natural disasters. I remember I had one after Ike, and it was turned out to be one of many that happened. But after Hurricane Ike, I had a young man who filled out false information on his FEMA forms and applications to get financial assistance. And then obviously it was later discovered because in his case it was the address where he was claiming that he lived. Uh, when the true homeowner made their own claim, FEMA said, wait a minute, we've already paid on this claim. And then, it was discovered that my guy's was a fraudulent application. Uh, but again, and I'm trying to think of an instance where it wouldn't be a financial incentive behind white collar, and I just can't think of one. Almost every case I've ever been involved in that you would call white collar had some aspect of financial gain for someone, even if it wasn't necessarily the person charged. Uh, we've seen federally in the region recently, we've seen an uptick in the Postal Service side uh, of white collar, because also classified basically as white collar crimes can be identity theft. And there have been a number of cases in the region of people taking mail uh, and then, either washing checks, which means there's a process whereby if you apply certain chemicals, you can remove what a person has written on a check and make the check payable to someone else. Uh, Also, credit cards that are shipped in the mail, things like that. Generally, that's considered white collar, though, because it involves the Postal Service inspection. I've had a case where my client had somehow gotten the master key for the Postal Service for neighborhood mailboxes. In the master plan communities, in the neighborhoods where they have a mailbox, not in front of your house, but a central mailbox down the street where everybody stops to get their mail. Uh, they had gotten the master key and would just open the back where the mailman does and steal all the mail. Uh, and so obviously that was for financial gain. Um, on the identity theft side, I've had someone finance a car in someone else's name, uh, and that person never found out. The victim, the person whose credit was being used to finance the Audi, didn't even know uh, until they were alerted by law enforcement. So sometimes, the crimes can be fairly complex to the point that it takes a lot of investigation, to get to it. Uh, some of them, the evidence is pretty shocking at how clever people are, and sometimes it's so simple that you don't know how they got away with it. But that's what white collars is meant to be, I guess. Another uh, another thing people ask or people perceive is that white collar crimes are punished to a lesser degree than many other crimes. And if you're looking at numbers, I understand why people think that, but the flip side of that is the average uh, white collar criminal is usually middle aged and never had a criminal history and is only in the position to do what they're doing because they're in a position of trust. So it would be, looking from the outside in, it would seem like maybe some of the sentences are light, but when you take into consideration all the collateral consequences that a person would seek, like loss of career, loss of everything, a shorter sentence seems to make more sense because it's not the type of crime that's usually going to be repeated. The person has no prior criminal history and they saw an opportunity and took it. That's, at least from a punishment standpoint, that's different from the person who decides to take a gun and rob a store or some a crime like that. So it's typically perceived out there that white collar criminals are punished to a lesser degree than others, but in my opinion, it's really not that way. Uh, Sorry, my phone's ringing. Uh, I'm laughing at someone texting me about my live right now. It's Katie Joe texting me. Um, so, and by the way, Katie Joe stopped by to see us yesterday, and that was nice. We haven't seen her in a while. Back to white collar. So there are, and basically what I've found is it depends on the underlying offense, whether it becomes a state crime or a federal crime. When I gave the examples talking about locally, we've had some cases where employees were caught taking money from the company without the company's knowledge. Usually those remain state cases and do not go federal. The ones that typically go federal are the more complex, involving, maybe multi-agency. Uh, Money laundering is another type of white collar crime. And so the schemes get fairly complicated and use banking institutions, wire transfers, and that type of stuff. So those are usually charged federally because it took more than a local agency to investigate it. If someone was stealing from me in my office, the Galveston Police Department could easily investigate that and close the case. Whereas if there was some kind of fraud going out of here that was through the internet and going, out of country, out of state, it takes so many more agencies that it usually goes federal because they have bigger resources than just a local department. So it kind of depends on the offense that is committed on whether or not it is going to be charged locally or federally. Trying to think what other questions we had. Oh, another one, that's big and obviously happens at a certain time of the year is income taxes. And it's people committing fraud to get returns that they're not due. But another aspect of that is these tax preparing services making fraudulent returns for people. Uh, Obviously, those pick up when income taxes are due, uh, but it it changes. Um, Let me see my notes here. That's a pretty good synopsis, I think, of what white collar crime is. It's generally involving fraud, uh, some type of fraud for monetary gain. We all get the phone calls that we don't want. A lot of those, the way that I can easily tell it's a bogus phone call is when they're calling from a spammed number, meaning I've had car dealerships show up as the caller ID, but then it's someone wanting to talk to me about my social security. I know it's a scam when they can't even call me from a legitimate number. And it's fun around here. Sometimes I'll put it on speakerphone and troll the caller just for everyone in the office's enjoyment. I should do that on a live. But yeah, I don't. Let's see. I see Mom, Miss Voorhees. I don't have any other questions really to answer about white collar crimes. I just thought it was kind of a neat topic to pick and discuss. There is, I got the difficult thing about doing these lives is that I got to come up with a different subject that I think anyone wants to listen to every week. And, after running through all the obvious things, I have to try and be creative about what to come up with. So uh, I will try to come up with something new. I hope y'all have a good rest of your week, and I will see y'all next Tuesday.